very clever, very elegant, and a great thinker of the game, fantastic thinker of the game. And that stood out right from the start. This was a guy that knew the game.
Mr. Composure, absolutely. He just had an ability to make time, I think, stand still. And then when he had the ball, his ability to bring people in, a precision footballer, beautiful to watch.
He was a great reader of the game. He knew where to go, when to go. His ball control was fantastic, and passing ability was fantastic. He sort of breezed through the game.
John was successful on the pitch because he was quick, he had good feet, his ball skills were second to none.
He was a complete player. A lot of players came to Australia who could have been top players in the UK or wherever they came from. And Johnny was one of these players as well.
His marshalling and his understanding of the game, movement of the ball, patterns of play, it was very, very good, but it was very influential around the rest of his teammates.
In 1958, I went to the local primary school where John was at. That's the first time I came in contact with him, and we're both into soccer in a huge way. We're both getting trials for senior teams. I got transferred first. I went to Greenock Morton seniors, and then Johnny a little bit later went down to Peterborough with our friend Jimmy Rooney. We didn't see each other for years after that, until Jimmy Rooney and I came to Australia. And then a few months later, John arrived and signed for George Cross. He was a striker then, and he would be scoring goals at a drop of a hat.
I first met John the weekend I arrived here from Dundee, Scotland. I met John at Olympic Park, because that was where George Cross were playing that day. It was a Sunday. That evening, John and his wife Margaret and son Bruce, they took me and my wife home that evening, and we stayed in St Kilda for a few days with John and his family. So that was my first introduction to John, and he played for George Cross that day, and I thought, this team is terrific. We're playing at Olympic Park, and it holds about 50,000 people. And I thought, this is really good. I'm looking forward to playing here.
Ken Murphy.
I first met John Gardiner when I arrived in Melbourne in 1976. John had recently joined Essendon Croatia and assisted the club look for players or get players from the UK. And John used his contact in Dundee. We were both from Dundee in Scotland. I had just recently been released of my contract from Dundee United. They told me, sorry son, you're not going to make it. Released me, and I'd signed just recently for Forfar Athletic. But when the offer came to come out to Australia, I was interested in travel, so we initiated that.
Probably the first time I'd met him would have been when I came out to play in 1981. I think my third game was against Green Gully, and John was one of the superstars of the team. Green Gully, I think, won everything at that time, and he was one of the main catalysts for it. Everyone knew how good he was.
Most definitely, he made a great leader. He was captain of Victoria, and he was captain of the different clubs he was with at the time as well, and it was his presence that sort of people really respected and wouldn't say anything against him. He was so far ahead, really.
I'd heard so much about John himself as a player. I'd only watched him a few times here and there when he represented the state and stuff like that, but knew lots of lads that had a common knowledge of Johnny and the way he worked, the way he played. So there was an expectation, and to be honest, it's trepidation when you're going to play with such great lads at Melbourne, Croatia at the time with Johnny. So it was a tremendous thing in my life to be able to play in the same side.
Technically, it was a good player. I saw him a lot play at the back. He wasn't the most vocal person. He's not a character that comes into a room and opens up to everyone. He's fairly quiet, but on the pitch, his football did the talking, and he was, a very good player.
John, he wasn't out of place playing against the likes of Pelly and Beckenbauer. He made the game look simple.
John Gardiner.
There's so many players today rushing all the time, and he was more like Beckenbauer than Beckenbauer himself. He was so highly respected in the game.
When I first arrived, John was the number 10 scoring goals, very quick on the ground and very skillful, and he knew exactly where the ball was going to be. Later in life, he did move back to sweeper.
The coach at the time decided to move him back into as a sweeper, as it was called at that time, and that really, he just shone because he could recognise and analyse players' positions and tell them where to stand. You go there, you stand there, you go there, and he would just pass the ball to them.
He was there in his passing, his technique, but time. He looked like he had loads of time everywhere. Then I saw him from midfield go to the back and start this change in a lot of people's thoughts as footballers to start from the back. I mean, some young lads would be thinking now the technique in football is to do that. He was ahead of his time.
John was playing the style of, or he wanted to play, and he was trying to do the style of play that is rampant throughout the world at the moment. He played most of his time as sweeper when I played. He'd gone from being a midfielder to a sweeper. I think his running days were behind him by the time I got to know him. He'd dribble in the 6-yard box. It was ridiculous at the time. You know, the coaches would always be upset with him, but he did his own thing.
John receiving the ball from Lou Kastner, the goalkeeper, and instead of just playing it back or kicking it long, John would play keepy up and headed the ball back to Lou Kastner. You couldn't just take the ball from a keeper and give him it back and he could pick it up. So John had to header the ball back to Lou and Lou could catch it. He made up his own rule, basically, because he says, I'll play keepy up and he'll take the piss out of all these guys. And he'll header the ball to Lou and Lou will catch it and then he could kick it if he needed to.
John today playing would have fit any side. He would have been, to me, the perfect footballer.
He would flourish in today's game. I watched Manchester City play the other night in the EPL, and I looked at it and went, wow, that's what we used to try and do. John Gardiner tried to get us to do that on bumpy surfaces. We just weren't up to it, probably took too many chances, but he would flourish in today's game. He was super at it. He was great.
I mean, you just watch Manchester City or all these teams who are playing out from passing from inside the box now to the defenders. He would have excelled in that type of play.
Manchester City play the ball out from goalkeeper to defenders, and they play it around and they play it back and keep possession of the ball. John did that 40 years ago.
When you think of what we're looking at on the telly now, John was doing all that then, and when he was coaching, he was inferencing strange things on the park. And the opposition and the other coaches didn't have a clue what was going on. It was quite comical at times.
John was one of the best thinkers of the game, and he always wanted to do something different. He was very thoughtful about it and adventurous. So it encouraged me to think outside the box, sort of thing, the old saying. I wanted to think, what could I do slightly differently? And John was a great one for trying different things. I remember one game where he says, right, we're not going to play with midfielders. I want 5 forwards and 5 defenders. And I'm not sure it actually worked, because you chase back into midfield. The game's very mobile, it's very transient. But I loved the idea that he wanted to try something different. He was definitely an out-the-box thinker.
Yeah, for me, it was probably, dare I say it, a little bit before his time. I think he'd have done a great job. You know, in recent years, if he was a coach, his understanding of the game is second to none. He could do things that you don't really think of in the game. Everyone knows just how much he knows about football. That was the big thing that hit everyone at the time. You know, he's a well-respected coach, even when he was playing at the time. And for me to have the opportunity at George Cross to play under him for, I think it was about 7 years, it really opened my eyes to football in a different capacity. I've got a lot to thank him for in what I've done in the game as well.
John Gardiner, he's playing his last representative game for Victoria after 22 appearances for the state side. John, how do you feel about today's game?
I'm looking forward to it very much. I mean, I'm a bit sorry that this will be my last game, but I feel I've survived maybe 10 years at international soccer, and I'm just going to step aside and let some young fellas take over, maybe get involved in the coaching.
He was a player's coach. He seemed to be on the side of the playing group, and it probably saved me a bit. I was very disillusioned by not making it at Dundee United, and it was a harsh environment. You know, you make or break it. You really got treated kind of poorly, unless you were a superstar. And I came out here, and John he's one of the best social coaches I've ever had. He knew how to bring people together. He was seriously ambitious, but then he liked to go for a beer afterwards and separate the two of them. I enjoyed the social aspect that John Gardiner brought to my game, my environment. It sort of brought me back to the game. I started to enjoy my game again.
I fell in love with the game all over on a different level for me personally. And I know this is not about me, but it was through Johnny, it was through the boss. And he brought us together. He brought a group, and there was a lot of British lads in that Melbourne-Croatia side, as well as the great Croatians and supporters. He brought us together, and we were all hands up to his ways of thinking. And he shaped lots of different lads on the park. Something happened there, and something happened. John actually, in my humble estimation, he put his arm around me, he took me under his wing. And he was the lad that controlled everything from the back. And for some reason, he chose me to emulate that. And he would put me at the back, and he was in the midfield. And there was games where he would swap that around again. I learned something from Johnny about how to share, and you don't have to worry about yourself, because he was the superstar there, but he let me in. He let me into something that he was recognised for. And for that, I'm forever grateful. That's who he is. Just amazing.
Captain John Gardiner, this will be his 21st and final state appearance. He made his debut back in 1973. He's had a slight injury recently and has had pain-killing needles to play in today's match.
John was a terrific player, but he was also excellent at positioning teams on the park. And he got better and better as the years went on with that. And he just knew what was going to happen before it happened. It was obvious that he was going to become a terrific coach.
Being a coach nowadays, he had a marked effect on me. I think at the age of 25, he encouraged me to go on coaching courses as a player, which I did, and you know, he was one of the instructors on the courses, but he's probably taught me a lot more about football than anyone else.
Johnny ended up being a great coach. While he was doing all this for Berwick, playing for us at Berwick and Chelsea, he was also coaching either Melbourne, Croatia or George Cross. John is well worth being inducted into the Hall of Fame. I think he deserves it.
I think he'll be very, very proud. It should have happened a long time ago.
But it's terrific that the Football Federation are recognising John, because he's been the best player and coach I have seen in Australia.
The longer time periods go on, you know, people do get forgotten in the game. We spoke about Jimmy Rooney before. He was a legend of the game, played in the '74 World Cup, and everyone knows who he is. I think it's the same with John. Anyone that's played going back in the 90s or 80s would know him. I'm so pleased that John's been, you know, recognised this way, because, like I say, he's had a massive influence over me in terms of coaching, and there's a lot of other people that are in coaching because of John.
He's indicated change of life for people who were willing to listen to the boss, who's a present, to understand that a man like that was going to receive such an accolade in life, so beautiful. I think John, in his always state of mind, would appreciate it. I just think he would be humbly grateful, and it'll be a treasure for the rest of his life.
John Gardiner will love this, as will his family. His wife Margaret Gardiner and his son Bruce Gardiner were always at the games. They were his biggest supporters, so regardless of what people say, it's not the individual awards. They play a big part in anybody's life, I think. So he will love this, he will love this. And you think about it, Victorian soccer has been John Gardiner's life. So he will hold this in high esteem. So I'm happy for him.
John's quite a humble man. I've never known him to brag about anything, so I think he'd be very humble with the whole award thing. But I think people around him, you know, family-wise, and some of his friends, I think it's great that he gets recognised in this way and becomes a part of the history of the game. A lot of people that think, you know, it's like a new age where the A-Leagues come around and There was never football before but there were some fantastic players over the years. We're doing the right duty to recognise the people that did influence the game and get it to the state it is today, and John's one of those people.
You know, I always believed that we could lift ourselves up, the players can prove all the armchair critics wrong, and that big smell